Well, you. The last.
Okay, yeah, I saw you with that reception.
Exactly. While doing. So too, email with Goldilocks. And this is not Goldilocks. Yeah, just 2 forms. We were talking about Goldilocks and how inside these very simple concepts, very tightly to explain concepts. First, expressing no. Yes, this is not
So, are your Minnesota friends okay with that? We was like,
They are complaining to me. They're like, oh, we are so jealous of you.
She's with this climate changing.
I'm like, I know you're jealous, but because I'll let you right.
But you were out, obviously, I saw you yesterday. Did you really ride your bike over here? I'm serious? Please don't. Exactly. Yes. I'm doing it. Well, I thought it was okay. I could sleep walking.
I think less understanding of you is using this notion of the change of world change. So it sounds like almost like an idea of enterprise we are living this different world, different from the one we used to. How do we make sense of it? So we didn't explain
All right, so let's get started. And before introducing our very distinguished speaker today, let me make 2 announcements for next week. On Tuesday, our visiting fellow Tomasz Migash is going to be talking about the problem of identity, synchronic and diachronic in quantum mechanics. So very different topics. I guess we won't have anything on quantum mechanics today. And on Friday next week, we have another outside guest, Bojana Mladenovic, who will going to be talking about Kuhn Unfinished Project here, and Zina will be introducing today. It's really my great pleasure to introduce a neighbor whose breaks are cold and freezing road and everything to be coming to talk to us today. George Loewenstein, Stein actually, that's correct. Today. You see how much who is a university professor, and Herbert A. Simon, chair of economics and psychology at Carnegie Mellon University. So he's got a CV of, I think, 47 pages long, at least the one that I managed to download earlier this week. So I won't summarize that CV, but I guess most of you know George worked one of the leading a researcher in economics and judgment and decision making. He's been working on an extremely large range of research topics: intertemporal choice, neuroeconomic preferences, bargaining, emotion, and so on and so forth. And he has had many awards, including many doctorates from Tilburg and other places. So I could go on and go on and go on for the next hour summarizing his CV. But rather, I'd rather hear George talk, and he's going to be talking about thanking, apologizing, bragging, and blaming.
Okay, thank you. So I picked this talk because I think it's a very nice integration of economics and psychology. There's a little bit of game theory and a lot of attribution theory and some signaling and other things. Okay, and this is work with Shireen Chaudhry, and saying with, this is very much of an understatement. This is her dissertation. And yeah, all right. So what I'm going to do in this talk is to draw connections between these four forms of communication, and to try to propose a theory that we think helps to explain why these types of communications are so fraught. Like if you feel like if you did something nice for somebody else and they don't thank you, like it really bothers you, right? And if someone did something bad to you and they don't apologize, that can also be very destructive. The absence of these communications can be very destructive. And we all know people who are reluctant to thank and apologize and things like that. So it's a theory that attempts to kind of explain some of the psychology behind these four forms of communication. All right, there's a lot of evidence that these things matter. It's been shown that thanks promote pro-social behaviors like tipping, volunteering, voting, helping. This is a study that was done with students who were soliciting donations over the phone. And before there was an intervention, the gratitude and control group were soliciting similar amounts of money. But after, for the gratitude group, the head of alumni relations thanked them personally for their efforts, and then their efforts were more fruitful after that. This is a study that's been done repeatedly, asking people what's important in the workplace. And you can see that full appreciation for work done was number 1 in 1946, and number 2 in 80, 86, and 92. It's kind of, so this is kind of boring and consistent. It's kind of some other patterns in the table which don't relate to the talk are kind of interesting. Like, for example, good wages, let's see, 5, 5, 5, 1. We seem to have become more materialistic in the recent past. Apologies, there's a lot of evidence that apologies are reduce malpractice suits, like in medical malpractice suits. There are some states which passed legislation to prevent doctors' apologies from being used against them later in a court, in a lawsuit. And those states, after they pass these statutes, the number of malpractice suits drops in those states. This is a kind of a cute study done by economists, The Power of Apology. They randomized people on the German eBay. These are German researchers. They asked them, and they asked customers to withdraw a negative online evaluation. There were 3 conditions: an apology, small monetary compensation, and large monetary compensation, 2.5 euros or 5 euros. And you can see that the apology was way more effective than kind of a bribe for removing the negative review. In the introduction, the authors write, the firm could just apologize for strategic reasons, But if an apology is costless, the customers should ignore such a cheap talk message. So why do firms still apologize much? And that's kind of part of what this talk is trying to explain. And in the conclusion they write, our results suggest that firms apologize so much because apologies do indeed influence customers' behavior. The underlying reasons for why an apology works remain unclear. And so really, that's a great motivation for this talk, because this talk is all about why thanking and apologizing does in fact have such a huge impact. Why aren't thanks and apologies cheap talk? After all, to say the words is effortless, right? In this talk, I'm going to describe this responsibility, what we call responsibility exchange theory, and it addresses the riddle of why these communications are so highly valued, why they're in fact not cheap but costly, why people are often reluctant to thank or apologize. Here's something from a Reddit post. I've come across many people who, when undoubtedly were grateful for something I did, would never say thank you. They may talk about how happy they are and even how nice your actions were, but never will you hear thank you. Same thing with sorry. Some people, regardless of how serious the error, will not say sorry. I'm sure they are apologetic, but they can't bring themselves to utter the word. Instead, they will often switch blame or try to claim the issue isn't as grave. My guess is that this is a self-esteem issue, pride. Their self-image is too fragile to admit weakness, and it's sad because you can almost feel like they want to say those words. I'm sure they have difficulty with other words too. Please, I love you, etc. It's a great post. So as I said, this draws a connection between thanking and apologizing, as well as bragging and blaming. It allows a game theoretical analysis of behavior and generates a wide range of predictions that I'm going to test in 4 different studies if I get to them. The one I really want to make sure I get to is study number 3, which I'm especially pleased about. It involves a kind of a live chat interaction between 2 people. All right, here's the framework. There's an originator, and the originator does something to the receiver, okay? It could be something good, or it could be something bad. Suppose that the outcome is positive. One thing that could happen is the receiver could thank the originator for doing whatever it was, the nice thing. So that involves giving credit. It could be a negative thing, that is, like the originator does something bad to the receiver, and then the originator could apologize, which involves it involves really conferring responsibility on on the other party. You can see that there's 2 blank cells here, and one of them is top left. That's if it's a positive outcome. Suppose that there's a positive outcome and the receiver, the person who receives the favor, doesn't thank. Well, maybe the originator in that situation might brag, like, oh, what do you think about that nice thing I did for you? That's bragging. And then there's an other missing cell, which is something negative happens. The originator does something bad to the receiver, and the originator doesn't apologize for it. Well, the receiver could verbally blame the originator. Okay, responsibility exchange theory has 2 basic building blocks. The first is that all 4 communications involve a trade-off between competence and warmth. Communications that involve giving credit or taking blame, those are thanking and apologizing, make the person who's communicating seem less competent. If you thank the other person for doing the nice thing that happened, or if you take blame for the bad thing that happened, you seem less competent. But because people care about responsibility, you seem generous because you're giving away something that people value. You're giving, when you apologize, you're saying, sorry, that bad thing that happened to you was my fault. So you're saying, I'm less competent than might appear, you're more competent. That's a nice thing to do, so you appear more warm, even though you appear less competent. Communications that involve taking credit or conferring blame, that is bragging and blaming, make one seem more competent but less generous. And there's a lot of research suggesting that competence and warmth are the primary dimensions on which people are judged, the two primary dimensions. Now, a third component of the second major component of this model is that people care about the presence of observers, but even if there's no observer, they still act as if there's an observer present. We refer to this as like the virtual spectator. So let's say that you are in your car and you let somebody go in front of you. You're packed in a line of packed traffic. You let somebody get in front of you, and suppose that they do the little wave, the little wave, which is so important, right? If they don't do that, you get really bothered, right? They're supposed to do the little wave, but you know that you let them in. You know that they know that you let them in. So why even bother to do that? Well, we in this theory kind of assume that people always are kind of thinking that there is, in effect, an invisible spectator even when there isn't one. Part of this could be that we're unable to discriminate between the many situations in which there are real spectators and those in which there are no spectators. It's also the case that communication creates common knowledge between the parties. When the person waves at you, you know that they know that you did them a favor and so on, at every level, and they know that you know and so on. It could also be that there's some kind of signaling going on, including self-signaling. Okay, here's the timeline of the model. There's an interaction between the originator, that's the person who takes the action, it could be a good action or a bad action, and a receiver who's affected by it. There are 3 points in time. At time t-1, the action occurs. And I'm not going to use the math very much, so you don't have to memorize this, but alpha A is the originator's actual responsibility for the outcome. This is the originator, this is the receiver. Delta W is the thing that happens, which could be a good thing or a bad thing. We use W because to refer to wealth, but it could be any good thing or bad thing. In the next period, there's a spectator. The spectator makes some initial guess about the originator's responsibility. So they make a guess of alpha, that's alpha 0. And then in the third period, some communication could occur. There could be thanking or blaming, there could be bragging or apologizing, or there could be total silence. And based on the communication, the spectator is going to update their impression of who is responsible for the good or bad thing that happened. That's the timeline. We assume that all communications are credible and convey full information about responsibility for delta W, the thing that happened. All right, a tiny bit, 1 page of math. And if you don't get it, it's not very important. We assume that people care about 2 things, material outcomes, W, and image. And we're interested in the change of image between time 1 and time 0 that happens as a result of the communication. And we assume that people care about 2 things: competence. This is actually the change in perceived competence, and this is the change in perceived warmth times gamma. Gamma is the importance that each individual place on being warm. So different people care more or less about warmth versus competence, and in different situations, warmth or competence is more important. So gamma reflects how important competence and warmth is to each individual in a particular situation. For a lot of the derivations, we assume that gamma is the same for both parties, but towards the end of the paper, we relax that assumption and look at situations. It's actually quite interesting. Let's say that one party cares about being competent, the other party cares about being warm. Like, think about, for example, interaction between a student and a professor. Hopefully the professor's competence is sort of established, but the student's competence is not. So the student might care a lot about competence, but the professor, the open question is like, is this professor nice or not? And so the professor might care more about being perceived as warm, and that can make a big difference. Okay, so this term is the change in utility from perceived warmth. This is the change in utility from perceived competence. And we assume that the change in perceived competence depends on two things: how good or bad was what happened to the receiver. Again, this delta W could be positive or negative. And second, the change in the spectator's perception of the originator's responsibility. We assume that the change in warmth depends only really on one thing. It depends on the amount of competence, the change in the perception of competence. So the more the communication leads to a change in the perception of competence, the bigger will be the impact on perceived warmth. People care about competence. If you communicate in a way that confers competence on the other party, that's viewed as warm. If you communicate in a way that confers competence on you, that's viewed as cold, as negative. Any questions? Okay, this formality allows game theoretic analyses of behavior, which generates novel predictions. Okay, first implication of this is very simple. It's that both parties will always prefer thanking to bragging, and they will always prefer apologizing to blaming. And here's why. Let's take a look at the originator of something good. If there's thanking, what happens to the originator? What happens to the originator's competence? If the receiver thanks the originator, what happens to the originator's competence? Goes up, right? And the originator could have bragged, but let's see. If the originator brags, then their competence goes up also, right? So, but what about warmth? If the originator gets thanked, they could have bragged, but they didn't. That looks warm because they could have bragged, but if they brag, their warmth goes down. Suppose, on the other hand, take a positive outcome for the receiver, the person who receives the positive outcome. If the originator, if the receiver, this is a positive thing, if they thank, they're going to appear less competent, and if the other party brags, if the originator brags about the good outcome, they're going to appear less competent. But if they're the one who thanks, then they're going to appear warm because they did something nice, they thanked. But if the other party brags, they should have thanked and they didn't thank, so they're going to appear cold. So if you look at this, you can see that for a positive outcome, for the originator, thanking dominates bragging because it's equal on competence and better on warmth. And for the receiver, thanking dominates bragging because it's equivalent on competence, but thanking is better in terms of warmth. And if you look at apologizing, it's the same thing. Apologizing dominates blaming for both parties. You're with me still? It's a lot to digest. Factors that determine the impact of communications: delta W, what happened; gamma, how much each individual cares about warmth relative to competence; and alpha 0 and alpha 1, the observer's initial and post-communication attribution of responsibility for delta W. Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out what are the assumptions you need. So, for example, when you have the two, pluses for the originator, I'm thinking brag.
Yeah.
So why doesn't it make a difference what sort of the magnitude of it would be? So I'm just trying to think it could be, where if the originator was not thanked, or if by bragging they get more confidence or less confidence, or whether these types of quantitative make a difference in the model.
I think on the competence side, there aren't such great differences. I mean, we're assuming that all communications are veridical and that they communicate credit and blame. So I think where maybe we should have some magnitudes in this table is on the warmth side, because clearly thanking is better in terms of warmth for the receiver. You do something good to me, I thank you. That makes me look warm. But suppose that, how does it make you look? Not as warm as me thanking you. Like you could have bragged, you didn't, so you look a little bit warmer. But really, the person who gets the most credit for the thanking is the person who actually thanks. So I do think that this should be a small plus sign and this should be a big plus sign. And similarly, when it comes to apologizing, the person who apologizes, who's the originator, should get more credit for apologizing than the other person should get for not blaming. Any other questions? All right. So this is study one. This is actually a study where we test the assumptions, not predictions of a model. And in this, there's a simple scenario. You, the spectator, are in a coffee shop. You're immersed in a book, and you witness an interaction between a jogger and a businessman. And there's the jogger. It could be a good interaction or a bad interaction. And there are three conditions: positive or negative outcome. In the positive outcome, the businessman buys the jogger a coffee. In the negative outcome, the jogger knocks over the businessman's coffee. Communications, three possibilities: silence, bragging, or the originator could brag or apologize depending on whether it's a good outcome or a bad outcome, and the receiver can thank or blame depending on whether it's a good outcome or a bad outcome. We did this with M-Turkers. Okay, here's one scenario. Imagine that you're in a coffee shop immersed in a book. The door swings open to let in a burst of cold air, and you look up to see a jogger who's clearly at the end of his run enter with only a credit card in his hand. He gets in line, followed by a businessman in a suit. A minute later, you hear the cashier tell the jogger, "Unfortunately, your credit card isn't going through." A few minutes later, you see the jogger headed to the door to leave the shop with a coffee in his hand. There's no communication here. There's a good outcome. The jogger ends up with coffee, but there's no communication. We ask a bunch of questions. Based only on what you have observed, what's your best guess of what happened? The jogger had either cash or another credit card in his pocket that he used to purchase the coffee, or the businessman purchased the coffee for the jogger. Who is responsible for the joggers being able to leave with a coffee? Based only on what you know from the story, how would you rate the competence of the two individuals? Based only on what you know from the story, how would you rate the warmth or friendliness of the two individuals? Here's a second scenario. It's the exact same scenario, but at the end, before he leaves, the jogger says to the businessman, "Thank you." A third scenario, this is the spilled coffee scenario now. And this is a blame scenario: negative outcome, blame. Remember, positive outcome, negative outcome, silence. One party communicates or the other party communicates. Imagine that you're a coffee shop immersed in a book. The door swings open to let in a burst of cold air, and you look up to see a jogger who's clearly at the end of his run. He gets in line after a businessman in a suit. A minute later, you hear an abrupt thud and look up to see that the businessman's coffee cup has fallen and spilled out on the floor. Both the jogger and the businessman stand facing the mess. As the jogger turns away to make his own order, the businessman says in a sarcastic tone, "Geez, I'm sorry." A few minutes later, both have left so that's blaming, right? Because it's clear that it's the businessman's coffee that has fallen. So if the businessman says sarcastically, "Geez, I'm sorry," clearly they're blaming the jogger. Okay. In the negative scenario, without communication, people wrongly thought that the businessman spills his own coffee. They switched to attributing it to the jogger after blaming and apologizing. So here's silence, and they think who's responsible for the bad outcome, for the spilled coffee? They think this businessman spilled his own coffee. If there's blaming, like the "geez, I'm sorry," or apologizing, then they appreciate that it was the jogger who was responsible for the businessman spilling the coffee. What about the good outcome? This is the jogger ending up with coffee, even though his credit card was turned down. If there's silence, they think that probably the jogger just found some loose change or something like that. If there's bragging on the part of the businessman or thanking on the part of the jogger, then they appreciate that it was the businessman who was responsible for buying the jogger the coffee. If we look at the warmth of let's take a look at the businessman. These are the positive, these are the negative outcomes, the spilled coffee. If the jogger apologizes, the businessman looks more competent because you know that the jogger spilled his coffee. If in the case of the jogger getting the businessman buying the jogger the coffee, either bragging or thanking lead the businessman to be perceived as more competent. And generally, you can the other predictions of the model are borne out. Most of the other predictions. Let's take a look at the warmth of the jogger. If the jogger apologizes, they seem warm, and if they thank, they seem warm. If the businessman blames or brags, then the blaming they seem less warm. So basically, this is a study that supports the assumptions of the model, not the predictions of the model. Let's take a look at the predictions. So here's a kind of a game theory analysis with 2 periods. It gets less interesting actually with 3 periods, but let's assume that there's 2 periods. So Olivia is the originator, O for originator. Roger is the receiver. And let's begin at the top looking at a positive outcome. And there's 2 possible games, one in which Olivia goes first. Olivia can remain silent, that's the originator, or Olivia could brag. And then Roger goes second. Roger could be silent, or Roger could thank. Or it could be reversed, Roger could go first. So let's take a look here. And remember that gamma is how much people care about warmth. So let's first look at a situation where people don't care very much about warmth. They care about competence. And suppose we get down to the bottom of this tree. Roger's making a choice. Olivia has remained silent. Roger has a choice between being silent or thanking. And if this is a very, very simple based on a very, very simple implementation of the model, all linear functions, like as simple as it could be. What you see is if Roger thanks, that's good for Olivia, right? But if Roger thanks, it's bad for Roger. Why? Why is it bad for Roger if he thanks? Looks less competent, right? And this is a situation in which both parties care more about competence than warmth. And so this is the outcome for Roger if he thanks. The outcome for Roger if he doesn't thank. Is he going to thank? No, he's going to remain silent. Olivia predicts that, right? So Olivia knows that if it comes down to it, this is going to be the outcome. If Olivia brags, then Olivia is going to get a positive payoff of 2, and Roger's going to get a negative payoff of -6 because Roger looks incompetent and cold, right? So but what is Olivia going to do? Is Olivia going to brag, in which case she gets 2, or is she going to remain silent, in which case she's going to get 0? Yeah, Olivia's going to brag. What if Roger goes first? Now let's take a look. If Roger goes first, and let's say that Roger remains silent, so Olivia can brag or not, and it's competence favoring, will Olivia brag? Yes, Olivia is going to brag because bragging gives 2 and remaining silent gives 0. And so Roger has a choice between thanking, which is going to give him -2, or Olivia bragging, which is going to give him -6. So it's a choice between 2 bad things, but what is Roger going to do? Roger is going to thank. So you can see the order in which they go matters. And it's also the case that whether competence is favored or warmth is favored matters as well. And it matters particularly in this game, but not in this game. And there's a similar set of kind of pretty rich predictions for the negative outcomes as well. Kind of very analogous predictions. Any questions? Okay, so some predictions. The order in which the 2 players move matters. Originators prefer to let the receiver think, but to have the opportunity to apologize first. That's because thanking and apologizing are dominating. Receivers prefer to thank first, but to give the originator the opportunity to apologize first. If thanking and apologizing fail to occur, blaming and bragging are more likely to occur the more competence is favored in the given context. That's very intuitive. When the players are matched on gamma, silence is not a unique equilibrium, but when they're mismatched, it can be. Okay, tests of these predictions using scenarios. This is done again with M-Turkers. And in this case, we have a scenario where two people work at a large firm or a homeless shelter. That's intended, the large firm is intended to favor competence. The homeless shelter is intended to favor warmth. You have a coworker versus you. Your coworker is named John, and either you need help on either you need help on the report or John needs help on the report. You're either the originator or receiver, and the supervisor either loves or hates the report. So it's either a positive delta W or a negative delta W. I think I won't read through the scenario. You get it? Okay. Two additional conditions were meant to further enhance the extent to which competence or warmth was favored. In the high stakes condition, the report's going to lead to a recommendation for a job promotion. So competence is very important. In the high warmth condition, you're friends with John. You and John are friends. Okay. Positive outcome. Who do you want to reveal the information first? So remember, the theory predicts that both parties prefer thanking to bragging, and so both the originator and the receiver would prefer that the receiver has the opportunity to thank before the originator has the opportunity to brag. Positive outcome, do you want to brag immediately or let the other person talk first? Then the originator wants to wait. Do you want to thank immediately or let the other person talk first? The receiver wants to thank immediately, not giving the originator the chance to brag. Negative outcome, same thing. They both would prefer for the originator to apologize than for the receiver to blame. And for the negative outcome, this one's not significant, but the receiver would prefer to wait rather than blaming immediately. They want to wait for an apology. Originators jumped to apologize when warmth is favored. This is the percentage of originators apologizing immediately, and you can see that when warmth is favored, they're more likely to apologize immediately than when competence is favored. And suppose that the receiver didn't think, it's a positive outcome, do you want to brag? And what you see is if competence is favored, they want to brag. If warmth is favored, they do not want to brag. Okay, so that's the second study. Here's the study that I'm most pleased about. This is like an experimental study. And there's two conditions, a chat condition and a no chat condition. And it's open. The chat is open-ended. They could write whenever they wanted to. They were randomly assigned to be either the originator or receiver based on the difficulty of the task. I'll show you how that worked in a moment. The outcomes were tied together. So the two parties are playing together, and they each work on this task, and the person who gets the higher score, their score determines the payoffs of both players. Okay, do you understand that? So, and they don't know that and then there's a second task, and they don't know that there's a second task. Here's the critical manipulation. The critical manipulation is one party gets an easy task, and the other party gets a very difficult task, and they don't know this. So the party with the easy task racks up lots and lots of points, and they end up determining the amount of money that both sides earn. the party with the difficult task, because it's difficult, they end up performing badly, and they are the receiver. Because the other person almost always ends up earning the points for both parties. You understand? Okay. So they get assigned their role. The easy task, the person with the easy task, that's the originator. The person with the hard task, that's the receiver. They get their scores. And now we randomize them again to, well, really this is the manipulation. Is there a chat for 2 minutes, or is there no live chat for 2 minutes? Then, surprise, there's going to be a second game, similar to the first game, and they're asked, do you want to work with the same person again? And then we give them a final task, and we ask them some questions. The DVs are, what does a chat look like, and do they want to work with their partner again?
And so do they know about, so you said they didn't know about the difference in difficulties of the games.
That's right.
Do they know they're playing a different game at all?
No.
So they know nothing about the game. So they might be assuming they're playing the same game.
We want them to assume that they're playing the same game. It's not active deception, but it would be natural for them to assume. Yeah. So our hypotheses are thanking and apologizing will occur more often than bragging and blaming, even though they have no expectation of working together again when they communicate. They don't realize that there's going to be a second task. The originator will give the receiver a chance to think, either by waiting or by prompting the receiver to talk about the task. So you can say, "Oh, Michael, what do you think about that? What do you think about what just happened?" So you're just hoping that the other party. Behavioral ramifications. We think that originators will be more likely to want to work with the receivers on the final task if they chat with the receivers than if they do not chat, holding constant performance. I mean, generally the originators should not want to work with the same receiver. Why is that? Why should the originator generally not want to work with the same person? Yeah, it looks like they're really bad, right? They got a low score. You think they're working on the same task and they got a really low score. Why would you want to work with them again, right? Okay, here's the easy task. Find two numbers that add up to this number. Here's the hard task. Find two numbers that add up to, sum to 10, sorry. And here's the first thing, and anyway. So you can see it's more difficult. Here's the live chat. You're competitive. We wanted to make it a competence favoring situation. So we kind of ratcheted it up. You have 2 minutes to chat before you automatically advance to the next stage. Feel free to say whatever you want, and so on. There's a chat box here. Preliminary coding results. There were 89 pairs in the chat condition, 78 with player O. 78 of those, it worked out. The player who was supposed to get the higher score did get the higher score. With two pairs, they didn't chat at all, even though they had the opportunity. And 67 pairs did talk about the task. We coded up who brought up the task first, thanking, which is acknowledging the other person's good performance, bragging, acknowledging one's own good performance, apologizing, acknowledge one's own bad performance, and blaming, acknowledging the other person's bad performance. And we had like two coders and we had good inter-rater reliability, but if they disagreed, then a third party adjudicated. All right, first message in the chat that brought up the task. The originator was very unlikely to thank. The originator was like a no thanks, non-thanks message, but the receiver, the person who got with the more difficult task, was very likely to thank. Example of player O's, hello, did you enjoy the task? That was interesting. That was an interesting task. How do you feel about this test? That was a fun hit. Hi there, that was intense, eh? And then example player R, good job with the game, nice job. Good job, 25 is more than I got. Great job on the task. You did really well on the game. We observed lots and lots of thanking by player R, and also some apologizing on the part of player R for getting a low score. We didn't observe a lot of bragging or blaming, and not much thanking on the part of player O.
How would you code those praising, like good job? Is that a thing?
That would be, yeah. So because, yeah, you're right. In our model, praising is equivalent to thanking. But yeah, it's a good point. We coded anything that gave the other party credit as thanking. Here's some examples chats. This is apologizing. This is player O. Hello, hi. That task was easy enough. Sorry I didn't get a higher score. This is a tough one for me. That's apologizing. It's fine as long as you tried. Thanks. No problem. Math tasks are simple because I can do math inside my head. Okay, here's thanking. Thanks for getting a high score. I'm terrible at this task. Are you there? Oh, thanks for getting a high score. I'm terrible at this task. Are you there? Like they thanked. Now they kind of want some credit for having thanked. Oh, it wasn't too bad. I just do what I can. I got stuck in the fourth or fifth one, but I tried my best. That's all you can do. Have you done many of these? Some others, which seemed harder to me. Blaming. What's up, smarty pants? What were you sleeping during the task? Say what? What were you sleeping? What's that about? You okay, man? Just wondering how much effort you put in. Maximum effort, obviously, smarty pants. How about you, that's blaming. Prompting. Hello. Hi, how are you? I'm fine, and you? I'm doing okay, no complaints. How did you feel about this test? It was okay. I think it was I was a little slower because I was trying to calculate. What does WBU mean?
What about you?
Oh, what about you? Yeah. I had no idea how to calculate it, so I went with guess. I didn't finish either. So yeah.
George, in the thanking example,
Yeah.
There's something interesting. I wonder how you would describe it. So it seems almost to be an effort to explain it away by saying, "Have you done many of these before?"
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering if you could comment on that or how that fits in with the sort of traditional categories you've described. Almost, we're looking for an explanation. You did better than I did. I'm glad you did.
Yeah.
There must be an explanation that would sort of balance it out a little bit and explain it away.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, sometimes people will thank, and then later on they will do something that kind of takes it back. Yeah, yeah.
How does that? How do you
Yeah.
interpret that? Is it sort of? Is it a backhanded kind of?
Yeah.
You know, how would you see it in terms of the way you were conceptualizing your model?
I mean, I guess I would say that the stream of consciousness was, like maybe I was too, maybe I'm a bit high on the niceness dimension and low on the competence. I'm going to do something to save a little bit of the competence that I lost by thinking, something like that. Yeah. But yeah, very nice observation. Player O is evaluation of player R. So O is the person who had the easy thing. Competence the chat doesn't matter very much, but if there's a chat, they tend to view player R as being warmer. Do they want to work with a partner or a random other? And this is player O is much more likely to want to work again with the same if there's a chat than if there's no chat. It didn't have much of an impact on player R. What this graph shows, this is the score difference. And what it shows is that with a chat, regardless of the score difference, so if there's a big score difference, should the originator want to work with the receiver again? If there's a big score difference? No, because it looks like they're incompetent. You'll have to carry the weight for both of you again, probably. But what you see is for all different score differences, if there's a chat, they're more likely to want to work with the same party again than if there's no chat. Yeah.
Doesn't that seem like it should be contingent on whether the chat included thanking?
That's right. But this is sort of like a intention to treat analysis.
In general.
Yeah, right. And you can see that most of the time, the communications that happen are thanking or apologizing. But you're right. This result is weakened by the fact that we're looking at everyone, regardless of what happened. So in a way, that would almost for sure it would be stronger.
If you tested that, what happens? Like, do you get a moderation there?
We should do that. Remind me. It's a good suggestion. Okay, the last study.
You gonna thank her?
Yeah. I think going back to the earlier question, I think saying "remind me of your" is a kind of thinking. Yeah, at least in our model. All right. Consequences for the actual impact on relationships. We call this kind of the epidemiological study. Does failing to thank compared to thanking hurt, or compared to thanking hurt relationships? Does failing to apologize? I mean, we all know the answer to this, but I think there are a few findings that go beyond the obvious here, and they relate to the question of whether people anticipate these effects. This is a pretty methodologically. This study has some serious issues. Okay, it's a survey. Participants asked to describe a scenario from their life. I think this is done with CMU alums. Please think of a situation in your life in which the following sequence of events happened. First, you did something that positively affected another person in some way. That is, you made them better off in any way, such as physically, emotionally, professionally, socially, mentally, spiritually, reputationally, etc. This person could be anyone, such as a friend, stranger, family member, etc. Subsequently, the other person did not fully express appreciation for what you did. There are many ways this could have failed. They could have failed to acknowledge your contribution, including but not limiting, did not give you enough credit, did not say thanks fully, and so on. And so we're looking at people on both sides and thanking and apologizing. And okay, so 2 by 2, positive outcome, negative outcome. Was there a communication? Was there no communication? And we did 2 surveys, one from the originator's perspective and one from the receiver's perspective. So was your relationship affected by this issue at all? Much worse to 100, much better. These are positive outcomes. For the originator, the person who did the good thing, you can see that the relationship was improved if they were thanked for it, and it was damaged if there was no thanks for it. What does the receiver, the person who got the other person did the nice thing for them, what's their reaction? They think if they thanked, that it's very positive. If they didn't thank, they don't. Now you can say this is very likely different things that they're talking about. So I would take this with a huge grain of salt. But you can see they don't think that not thanking is going to be very harmful, although it could very well be very different situations that they're thinking of. Are you likely to do favors for the person again in the future? Thanking, very much so. No thanks, not likely to do favors. Is that person likely to do favors for you in the future? Again, thanking, yes, but no thanks. The people who receive the favor, you could say, I don't know if I even believe these results, but you could say that the people who are the receivers don't appreciate how important the thanking is. What about negative? Here's apology, no apology. Was it relationship affected? And of course, it was affected worse from the receiver. This is the person who got the bad outcome, who experienced the bad outcome. No apology is really bad compared to apology. It's a weaker relationship from the originator's perspective. Is that person likely to avoid you in the future? The originator, again, this is the person who did the bad thing, thinks that they are very much less likely to, they don't think that the other person is likely to avoid them, but in either situation, but with no apology, the receiver is more likely to avoid them. Other predictions from the model: the originator should threaten to brag, even if bragging would cause a net loss such that he wouldn't brag in the absence of thanks. Why does the originator want the receiver to think that he or she is going to brag?
It's a cue for thanks.
Yeah, because bragging is worse for both parties. If I think that you're going to brag, then I'll always want to thank. But if I don't think you're going to brag, then I might think, oh, then I'm going to be silent, because silence might be best for me. If thanking causes a net loss, the receiver should avoid the originator so they don't feel forced to thank. So suppose you don't want to thank somebody for something they did for you, you might just avoid them. Silence is an equilibrium when players are mismatched on gamma. For example, receivers who care much more about competence can take advantage of originators who care much more about warmth by never thanking them, knowing that the originators won't brag. So an originator who cares about warmth is never going to brag. If you really care about warmth, you're never going to brag. And suppose that you care about competence, you know the other person cares about warmth, you know that they're not going to brag, and so since you care about competence, you might not thank. Originators will be less motivated to apologize if they're blamed first. Once you get blamed, now the responsibility has been conferred. Like now the spectator knows who's responsible, and apologizing no longer looks very honorable after you've been blamed, right? So if your significant other blames you for something, then you're much less, according to this model, you're much less likely to apologize after they've blamed you. Like you might have apologized if they'd given you a chance, but after they blame you, you might not apologize, because what's the point? You're already, it's established that you did the bad thing. Relaxing assumptions, we allow people to lie. When competence is favored, people will more easily brag and blame. This makes thanking and apologizing more credible. And in general, communications that are adverse to you are more credible. So that's kind of what happens when we allow people to lie. If warmth matters enough, people may, you could imagine somebody actually if warmth was really important, you might thank someone, even you might not actually think the other person is responsible for the good thing that happened. And you might thank them, even though you're secretly thinking to yourself, they're not responsible, I did that thing. You're thanking them because warmth is so important that you'll get warmth credit. In fact, in their eyes, you're going to get extra credit because you gave them credit for something that they probably, hopefully, know that they didn't really deserve credit for. When guesses about the other person's beliefs are wrong, like underestimating a person's willingness to brag or blame, less thanking and apologizing and more bragging and blaming will occur. Okay, superficial communication. If a thanks or apology does not fully reveal the information, then there could still be value to bragging or blaming. One of the predictions of the model is we've all heard false apologies, right? A false apology is, oh, I'm sorry that you feel that way, right? Like, I'm sorry you feel that way is not an apology. It sounds like an apology, but it's not. An apology has to actually take blame. So the theory has kind of implications for what's a real apology or for what's a real thanks versus fake. Other findings consistent with the theory: gender differences. Why do women apologize more than men? There's a lot of research showing that women apologize more than men. Well, the theory would say, could explain that. If it's more important for women to be warm than to be competent, think about like Hillary Clinton, for example, how much she got hurt by being perceived as cold. If it's more important for women to appear warm, then they're going to apologize more. Cultural differences, bragging will be more acceptable in individualistic cultures than collectivist ones. And I've already talked about avoiding behavior. Okay, Thanks.
So we take a 1 minute break, as we always do in case someone has to leave, and then we'll open the floor for questions. So if you're not the person who psychologists takes question at the end.
Yeah. Okay.
So raise your hand if you have a question.
Okay.